First contact and fatal miscalculation. High Commander Vexthor of the Jarkali Dominion stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, his primary eyes fixed on the strange vessel that had appeared at the edge of their territorial space. The ship was unlike anything in their extensive database. Its hull seemed almost crystalline, with geometric patterns that made little sense to Jarkali engineering principles. Analysis complete, High Commander, reported Science Officer Krelix, her voice tinged with dismissive confidence. The vessel appears to be of human origin, but it's clearly a civilian research ship. Our scans detect no military-grade armor or weapon systems. Vexthor's secondary eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic projection. The human vessel hung in space like a delicate sculpture, its transparent sections revealing what appeared to be gardens and observation decks. Everything about it screamed vulnerability. Humans, he chittered softly. They're so far from their protected spaces. Have they even responded to our presence? They're broadcasting some kind of musical signal. Communications Officer Zaltex reported with obvious confusion. It appears to be what humans call classical music, something about the planets. Mars, Jupiter, Holst's the planets, his cultural specialist chimed in. It's considered one of their artistic masterpieces. Vexthor felt his mandibles twitch in amusement. The humans were either incredibly naive or monumentally stupid to venture this far into contested space with nothing but artwork to protect them. The crystalline vessel would make an excellent prize. Human technology, while primitive in many ways, often contains surprising innovations that could be repurposed. Send the standard warning. If they don't immediately withdraw, we'll demonstrate why the Jarkali Dominion is not to be trifled with. The warning was transmitted. The human vessel's only response was to adjust its broadcast. The music shifted to something called Ride of the Valkyries. They're either deaf or insane, Vexthor declared. Weapons officer, give them a demonstration. Target their propulsion systems with a low-yield particle beam. Let's see how they like real power instead of musical aesthetics. The particle beam lanced out from the Eternal Vigilance's forward array and passed straight through the human vessel, as if it weren't there. Vexthor's primary eyes blinked in rapid succession. Report. Sir, the beam. It's as if the ship isn't solid. Our targeting systems confirm a hit, but there was no impact, no energy absorption. Nothing. Impossible. Launch a spread of seeking torpedoes. Let's see them ignore those. 12 quantum-guided torpedoes streaked across space, their paths curving gracefully toward the human vessel. Each one passed straight through the crystalline hull, emerging on the other side without detonating. The human ship's musical broadcast changed again. Now it was playing something with a driving beat, what their database identified as another one bites the dust. High Commander, his science officer's voice had lost all its previous confidence. I'm detecting something strange. The space around their vessel. It's not behaving according to any known physics. Before Vexthor could demand clarification, the human ship began to move. But it didn't move like a ship should. Instead of pushing against space, it seemed to fold space around itself, simultaneously existing in multiple locations while remaining perfectly still. The last thing Vexthor heard before the real battle began was a new transmission from the human vessel. This time, a voice speaking perfect Jarkali. You really should have checked what department our research focused on. The impossible defense. Vexthor had seen many battles in his centuries of service to the Dominion. He had faced quantum destroyers from the Centauri Collective, survived encounters with the dreaded high ships of the Endrax, and even once outmaneuvered a temporal raider. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for this. Full combat spread, he ordered, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his thoracic cavity. Every weapon we have. Fire at will. The Eternal Vigilance was the pride of the Jarkali fleet, equipped with weaponry that could reduce a small moon to atoms. Particle beams, quantum torpedoes, gravity lances, and antimatter projectors all fired in perfect sequence. The space between the two ships became a deadly tapestry of destructive energy, and every single shot passed harmlessly through the human vessel. High Commander, Science Officer Krelix's voice had taken on a peculiar tone. Was that all? I've isolated the anomaly. The human ship. It's not actually where we see it. In fact, I'm not certain it's entirely in our universe at all. Vexthor's secondary eyes swiveled toward her station. Explain. They're using some form of quantum displacement field, but at a scale that should be impossible. It's as if they found a way to exist partially in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Our weapons can't hit them because they're not fully present in any one location. The human ship's musical broadcast had changed again. Now it was playing something their database identified as Space Oddity. Sir, Tactical Officer Renzak's alert cut through the musical accompaniment. They're launching something. Vexthor's attention snapped back to the main display. Dozens of small objects were emerging from the crystalline vessel, each about the size of a Jarkali escape pod. As they watched, the objects began to move in impossible patterns, leaving trails of light that seemed to hang in space. Analysis, Vexthor demanded. They appear to be probes. No, drones. But sir, their energy signatures make no sense. They're generating more power than our entire ship, but I can't detect any form of conventional propulsion or power source. The drones arranged themselves in a complex three-dimensional pattern around the human vessel. Suddenly, the space between them began to shimmer with a web of interconnected energy fields. By the first nest, Krelix whispered, they're creating a localized space-time matrix. The mathematical complexity required to maintain such a structure. It would take our most advanced quantum computers centuries just to calculate the basic framework. Vexthor felt his mandibles clench. Everything he thought he knew about human technological capabilities was proving dangerously wrong. Can we disrupt the matrix? Sir, I don't think we should. Before Krelix could finish her warning, Weapons Officer Zexpar had already launched a salvo of matrix-disrupting warheads. The weapons streaked toward the energy web, their specialized payloads designed to unravel any known form of energy matrix. The moment they entered the web's influence, the warheads changed. They didn't explode or dissipate. They transformed, their matter and energy reconstructing itself into perfect crystalline spheres that began orbiting the human vessel like tiny moons. They just converted our weapons, Sexfar said, his voice barely a whisper. Converted them at the quantum level, redirected their purpose, all in microseconds. A new transmission came from the human ship, still in perfect Jarkali. Your weapons are quite elegant, actually. We've been looking for some additional material to help stabilize our dimensional anchor. Thank you for the donation. Vexthor felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since his early days as a cadet. Pure, unrestrained fear. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were operating on a level of technological sophistication that made the Jarkali's most advanced systems look like primitive tools. All power to defensive systems, he ordered. Initiate emergency temporal shift. The Eternal Vigilance's most secret weapon, the ability to step partially out of normal spacetime, was their last resort. As the massive engines began to power up, Vexthor allowed himself a moment of hope. That hope died as the human ship's next transmission came through. Oh, you're trying to temporal shift. Here, let us help you with that calculation. You're off by a factor of 10 to the minus 37th power. Easy mistake to make. Technology beyond understanding. The Eternal Vigilance shuddered as its temporal drive engaged, the massive energies involved threatening to tear reality itself. Around them, space began to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. Vexthor felt the familiar disorientation as his ship began to slip between moments of time. Then everything stopped. Not just the temporal shift, everything. The vibration of the engines, the movement of particles in the air, even the quantum fluctuations in space itself. Through the main viewport, Vexthor could see motes of dust hanging motionless in the air, frozen between one instant and the next. Everything except the crew and the human vessel. Fascinating approach to temporal manipulation. Came the human transmission, now accompanied by something their database identified as time in a bottle by Jim Croce. But you're thinking too linearly. Time isn't just a dimension to step sideways from. It's more like a canvas to paint on. Science officer Krelix's instruments were going haywire. Sir, they're not just blocking our temporal shift. They're actively manipulating the temporal field. They've created a localized bubble of. I don't even have words for this. It's as if they've taken a slice of time itself and turned it into a laboratory. The human ship was changing. The crystalline structure began to flow like liquid, reforming itself into new configurations. Gardens became laboratories. Observation decks transformed into what appeared to be massive computational arrays. Yet somehow, the vessel maintained its ethereal beauty, like a living sculpture crafted from light and mathematics. You know, the human voice continued conversationally, we really are a research vessel. The Temporal Anthropology Department at the University of Terra Nova is always interested in studying first contact scenarios with emerging civilizations. Vexthor felt his primary heart skip a beat. Emerging civilizations. He managed to croak. Oh yes, your temporal drive design is quite promising, actually. Give it another few centuries of development, and you might achieve true temporal manipulation instead of just skipping between pre-existing moments. Would you like to see what that looks like? Before anyone could respond, reality shifted. Suddenly, the bridge crew of the Eternal Vigilance found themselves looking at multiple versions of their own ship, each one existing in a different moment of time, all arranged in a perfect spiral through four-dimensional space. This is impossible, Tactical Officer Renzak whispered. The power requirements alone. Power. The human voice seemed amused. Oh, you're still thinking in terms of energy conversion. We passed that limitation when we figured out how to harvest quantum fluctuations from parallel universes. Much cleaner than antimatter, though it did take some getting used to. The math can be a bit counterintuitive when you're pulling energy from universes where the fundamental constants are different. Krelix's sensor arrays were picking up readings that threatened to burn out their quantum processors. High Commander, they're not just manipulating space and time. They're rewriting the underlying quantum fields themselves. It's as if they've turned the fabric of reality into a programmable medium. The human chip structure continued to flow and change, each new configuration more beautiful and terrifying than the last. What had appeared to be simple gardens were revealed as multi-dimensional computing arrays, using engineered plants to perform calculations through their growth patterns. The transparent sections they'd mistaken for observation decks were actually windows into other universes, used for something the humans casually referred to as cross-dimensional peer review. Would anyone on your crew be interested in attending a lecture? The human voice asked cheerfully. Professor Chen is giving a fascinating presentation on practical applications of 11-dimensional topology in spacecraft design in what you'd consider about 20 minutes ago. Linear time is optional for attendance, of course. Vexthor, Supreme Commander of the most advanced warship in the Jarkeli fleet, found himself sitting heavily in his command chair. Everything he thought he knew about the universe, about his species' place in it, about the very nature of reality itself, was being casually rewritten by what appeared to be a human academic institution's research vessel. The music changed again, now playing something called the Galaxy Song from Monty Python. As the whimsical tune filled their ship, the human vessel began to demonstrate exactly what 11-dimensional topology meant in practice. Tables turned. As the Eternal Vigilance's crew struggled to comprehend the reality-bending display before them, their ship's sensors detected something new. The human vessel's crystalline structure had begun emitting patterns of light that seemed to dance through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Ah, the human voice commented, now accompanied by something called Dancing Queen by ABA. It seems our graduate students have finished their quantum field analysis of your weapon systems. Quite innovative work, by the way. Your particle beam technology has some unique properties we hadn't considered. Would you mind if we cited your designs in a few research papers? Vex Thor found his voice at last. You've been studying us. This entire time. Of course. That's what a research vessel does. Though I should mention, your temporal shift attempt has been added to our practical examples of common temporal navigation mistakes database. Don't worry, we've kept it anonymous. Academic integrity and all that. The displays on the bridge suddenly came alive with mathematical formulae and diagrams, improvements to their own systems, written in perfect Jarkelly technical notation. Consider it a peer review, the human voice explained. Your quantum torpedo guidance systems, for instance, brilliant work on the basic principles, but you're limiting yourselves by adhering to traditional causality. Here's how they could work if you let them exist in all possible target locations simultaneously. Science Officer Krelix was frantically copying down the equations, her secondary eyes wide with wonder. This is beyond revolutionary. They've solved problems our greatest minds haven't even been able to properly formulate yet. The human ship's structure had stabilized into what appeared to be a lecture hall configuration, complete with what looked like students taking notes on the battle. Some of them appeared to be in multiple places at once, presumably to observe from different angles simultaneously. Now, the human voice continued, about your incursion into this sector. We understand the territorial ambitions of emerging species. We went through that phase ourselves a few millennia ago. But we really must insist on proper academic protocols. If you wish to study this region of space, you'll need to submit a proper research proposal and get it approved by the Ethics Committee. A document materialized on Vex Thor's personal display. A graduate-level grant application form from the University of Terra Nova, Department of Sociological Development Studies. The committee meets every third Tuesday of next week. The voice added helpfully. Linear time frame is flexible, of course, but the paperwork needs to be filed in strict causal order. Department policy, you understand. Tactical Officer Renzak had given up trying to track the human ship's weapons capabilities, mainly because his instruments insisted the vessel simultaneously had no weapons at all, and was armed with what appeared to be weaponized theories of mathematics. They could have destroyed us at any time, he whispered. But instead they're offering us course credits. Of course not, the human voice replied cheerfully. Undergraduate credits require at least a basic understanding of pan-dimensional physics. We're offering you a chance to audit the introductory sessions. Though your temporal shift attempt did show promise, perhaps we could discuss a provisional graduate program. The music shifted again, now playing Don't Stop Believin', as portions of the human ship began to phase through realities that hadn't existed until they needed them to. Now then, the voice continued, shall we discuss your ship's research potential? We've noticed some fascinating quantum fluctuations in your engine core that suggest a natural aptitude for trans-dimensional mechanics. With a few minor adjustments, and proper ethical oversight, of course, you could be conducting your own temporal field studies within a few decades. Vex Thor looked at his crew, at the impossible ship before them, at the mathematics that redefined their understanding of reality itself, and made the only decision he could. Where do we sign up? A lesson in humility, 3 standard months later, or simultaneously, depending on one's perspective on temporal mechanics. The eternal vigilance had been transformed. Where once there were weapon arrays, now stood quantum observation decks. The torpedo launchers had been repurposed as multidimensional sensor platforms, and the bridge itself had become a hybrid command center and lecture hall. Vex Thor sat in what used to be his command chair, now modified to accommodate the extra-dimensional sensor feeds required for basic temporal physics observations. He was attempting to make sense of his homework assignment. Basic applications of non-Euclidean mathematics in breakfast preparation, when the human ship phased into existence beside them. Today, it had taken the form of a Mobius strip made of crystalline fractals, each layer containing its own self-contained universe. The ship's now familiar musical greeting started playing. The final countdown. As a holographic lecture hall materialized across both vessels. Good morning, afternoon, or conceptual time state. Professor Zhang's avatar appeared, existing in several quantum states simultaneously as usual. I trust everyone has completed their assigned reading on paradox-free causality loops. Krelix, who had taken to temporal physics with surprising aptitude, raised all four of her appendages. Professor, I have a question about the practical exercise. When we attempted to make tomorrow's breakfast yesterday, we accidentally created a recursive loop of infinite toast. Is that supposed to happen? Excellent question. Professor Zhang beamed, his smile existing in 11 dimensions at once. That's actually a common mistake when first dealing with temporal cuisine. Remember, you need to account for the quantum uncertainty principle in your toaster settings. Speaking of which, High Commander Vexthor, how are you progressing with your thesis proposal? Vexthor chittered nervously. The past 3 months of human university education had completely revolutionized his understanding of reality, but he still struggled with what humans considered basic concepts. I'm exploring the possibility of using our ship's former weapon systems to create a trans-dimensional library. The challenge is ensuring the books can be returned to their proper timeline after being borrowed. A fascinating approach to temporal spatial information architecture. Professor Zhang's avatar shifted through several possibility states approvingly. Though you might want to consult with Dr. Martinez in the Quantum Librarian Sciences Department. She wrote a delightful paper on nonlinear catalog systems last Thursday next month. The crew of the Eternal Vigilance had adapted remarkably well to their new academic pursuits. Renzak, the former tactical officer, had discovered a passion for theoretical peace studies, particularly focusing on converting weapons into educational tools. He was currently working on transforming their remaining quantum torpedoes into mobile lecture halls that could exist in multiple war zones simultaneously, teaching conflict resolution through advanced probability manipulation. Before we begin today's lesson on practical applications of uncertainty principles in diplomatic relations, Professor Zhang continued, I have some exciting news. The Ethics Committee has reviewed your species application for full academic recognition, based on your crew's remarkable progress. Particularly that delightful experiment with quantum-entangled coffee machines, they've agreed to establish a full satellite campus in your home system. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through both the physical and temporal planes of existence. A real human university campus in Jarkelly space. The implications for their civilization's development were staggering. Of course, the professor added with a smile that somehow conveyed amusement in 17 different dimensional planes. This means you'll need to convert the rest of your military fleet into educational facilities. But our Department of Applied Pacifistic Engineering would be happy to assist. They've developed some wonderful techniques for transforming doomsday weapons into particularly engaging classroom demonstrations. As Vexthor looked around at his crew, now more students than warriors, he reflected on how completely their encounter with the human research vessel had changed their perspective. They had come seeking conquest and found enlightenment instead. Their weapons had become tools of learning, their military discipline transformed into academic rigor. The humans had defeated them not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding. They had turned an act of aggression into an opportunity for education, and in doing so, had shown them a universe far more vast and wonderful than they had imagined. Now then, Professor Zhang's avatar cycled through several probable lecture states. Shall we begin today's lesson? I believe we were going to discuss the proper way to conjugate verbs across parallel timelines. As the lecture began, Vexthor opened his 11-dimensional notebook and smiled. The Eternal Vigilance had failed in its military mission, but it had succeeded in finding something far more valuable, a future where the only universal constant was the pursuit of knowledge. And somewhere, in a dimension slightly adjacent to conventional reality, the human ship's AI continued playing its carefully curated soundtrack, this time choosing We are the champions, as it phase shifted into position for another lecture on the impossible made possible through the power of human ingenuity and the unrelenting force of proper academic procedure.